We turn now to the war in Ukraine as Russia launches missiles in the direction of Kyiv. Russian President Vladimir Putin joining in his nation's Victory Day celebrations, claiming the real war is actually being waged against Russia.
European Union Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen also made her way to Ukraine's capital city for a show of support to Zelensky. Foreign correspondent Shelby Wilder has been closely following the day's events. She's live in Lviv with more. Shelby.
Well, Russia toned down its military parade in Moscow today, apparently due to security concerns, but also evidently because Russia has little to celebrate in regards to its faltering invasion of Ukraine. One lone Soviet-era tank rolled through Moscow's Red Square, which, in comparison to Russia's Victory Day parade last year, this one was incredibly scaled back and muted. But Russia still marked the event by carrying out more widespread attacks on Ukraine. We talked about this on air yesterday, saying we were anticipating strikes, and that did happen in the early hours of this morning. Ukraine's air defense said they shot down 23 out of 25 cruise missiles. The majority of those were aimed at Kyiv, the nation's capital. This was the second strike on Kyiv within 2 days and the fifth wave of attacks on the nation's capital so far this month, to give you an idea of the scale there. Now, no civilians were injured today, but debris from an intercepted missile did hit a residential building and was scattered across parts of Kyiv. We should note that yesterday, Russia had carried out a drone strike on the Ukrainian capital, launching at least 36 drones that were downed by Ukraine's air defense. And debris from those drones did hit another residential apartment building, which injured 5 people in the nation's capital. Otherwise, we've heard Ukraine's military say that they believe Russia is trying to wear down Ukraine's air defense and stockpiles as Ukraine is now launching its counter-offensive. Other news we've been following today, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made a visit to Kyiv. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said that they discussed defense matters, EU integration, trade, and also additional sanctions against Russia. So Zelensky discussed all of this with the EU chief. And Ursula von der Leyen's visit coincided with Russia's Victory Day. Meanwhile, here in Ukraine, President Zelensky has now renamed May 9th to Europe Day, saying that the purpose is to celebrate peace and unity and sort of serving as a symbolic response to Moscow's military parade. Otherwise, we have been under air raid sirens across the country, even here in Lviv early this morning. Again, I'm reporting from the west of Ukraine, very close to the Polish border, and Ukrainian officials have just warned civilians to anticipate that there could be more strikes tonight, as Russia would like to continue having some sort of symbolic victory by ramping up its attacks across the country. But that's the latest roundup of the news from me, Shelby Wilder, here on the ground in Lviv, Ukraine.
Shelby Wilder, thank you and stay safe. And joining us now to discuss further, economist and former senior naval intelligence officer John Jordan, plus U.S. Army retired and president at the London Center for Policy Research, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. I'm going to start with you, John. Your thoughts about this very scaled down, I will say, celebration in Russia today. Remember, last year was quite different.
It's hard to overstate the importance of that. I've been dealing with the Russians and studying them for most of my adult life. And in the 78 years since the end of the Second World War, Dien Pobєdy, or Victory Day, has been a big deal. I mean, it didn't matter how young Russians were. There's a connectedness to their history, and it's a big part of the Russian psyche, where they've always observed that. My phone today blew up with a bunch of Russians that I know wishing me a happy Victory Day, believe it or not. But to see this scaled down tells you exactly how concerned the Putin administration is. In fact, one of the things they didn't have was what's called the Regiment of the Immortals. It's a tradition where descendants of people that had died in the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, as they call it, would carry pictures of the deceased in as part of the parade. That was banned for the first time this year, partially because the Putin people were afraid that it would be a spark or an outlet for those that wanted to talk about casualties in Ukraine. So not only was it scaled down, big pieces of it were taken out. And I can't stress enough how important that is to Russians and how much that must have been noticed by the Russian public.
Yeah, it had to be noticed. It is Victory Day in Russia. Meanwhile, they're supposed to celebrate the defeat of the Nazis. Ukrainian President Zelensky, though, declared it to be Europe Day, stating Ukraine is fighting against total evil, fighting for the future, its own and that of the whole of Europe. And if we can go on to the next one, Putin has repeatedly referred to the war in Ukraine as a sacred battle, similar to the challenge that Moscow faced when Adolf Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. So everybody's trying to win that messaging, Colonel Shaffer. How do you interpret what's going on?
Well, Zelensky's got to create a bright line between he and the Russians because the truth is they were part of the Soviet Union during World War II. They actually were part of the force that defeated the Nazis. So I understand what Zelensky's trying to do here is to distinguish with a difference what they're doing, Ukraine, regarding defending themselves against the Russian invasion versus the overall VE Day. I mean, remember, Bob, we celebrated VE Day as well because you know General Eisenhower and our forces were able to defeat with the Russians the Nazis. So it's very important at this point for this distinction with a difference. And I think his speech did a good job of defining what they're doing versus what the Russians are doing. And indeed, I think he could have probably just pushed and said our allies, such as the United States and most of the NATO nations, were part of that victory. He didn't say that, but I think he could have done that. And I think it would have helped him in his messaging regarding the difference with he and the Russians.
Yeah, and John, going back to what we were talking about, how this Victory Day was celebrated very differently from in the past, I want to get your thoughts on Vladimir Putin at this point. It seems like we've been seeing less of him. Of course, there are always rumors swirling about his health. With your extensive experience, where do you think he is psychologically at this point? Is he more paranoid than usual, concerned? Is he boistered in this war?
Well, let's separate fact from what we know, because there's a whole lot of irresponsible speculation out there about his health. We don't know. What we do know is that he is very, very concerned about his messaging towards the Russian public. We in the West and observers tend to think, oh, he says something that we are the intended audience. That really isn't the case. His messaging now is solely focused inward. And what he's trying to do is tap into that deep, unique sense of Russian patriotism, connection to their history, to try to buttress what is frankly a collapsing narrative that he has with their economy getting weaker, the enormous casualties, and so many other messaging problems they have. And what he's tapping into right now is, and he's using the Russian Orthodox Church for this, is this sense that we in Russia are fighting for Western civilization. In fact, they even claim that they're fighting for Christendom and Christian values. And you see that it's a pervasive theme in Russian media. And that's what he's trying to do, is to offset the collapse of the narrative, the historical bargain between him and the public, that I will keep the economy afloat and you, the Russian public, stay out of politics and leave us to our devices. That's collapsing, so now trying to tap into part of the Russian soul.
All right, John Jordan, Lieutenant Colonel, Tony Shaffer, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.